Our next speaker is Dr. Sohail Husain. Dr. Husain is an associate professor of pediatric gastroenterology at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh and the University of Pittsburgh. He is a physician scientist whose overarching goals are to develop novel, targeted therapies for acute and chronic pancreatitis. He actively writes research grants. He is privileged to currently hold single PI R01 grants. He has previously received career development funding in the form of a K-08 from NIDDK at the NIH, as well as startup funding from the AGA and the NASPGHAN Foundation. He has served as a former research committee chair of NASPGHAN and is currently a standing member of an NIH study section, roles that he tells really helped him understand how to write grants and, more importantly, how to help others write them. Dr. Husain will be speaking on getting NIH funding.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Nira, and thanks to all of you for being here on a Sunday morning this early. I noticed that there are at least a couple of Canadians in the audience, and although there are notable differences with CIHR and the NIH, there are many similarities, and I hope that you'll find this talk relevant. I will tell you, as Nira has asked, about getting NIH funding. So here are the objectives. First, I'd like to tell you how to make a cake, and hopefully you'll see how there are parallels to grant writing. I'd like to provide tips on grant writing, and then tell you about the mechanics of getting NIH funding. So all you need to make a cake are some essential ingredients, right? Flour, milk, sugar. There's even an egg in there. But what's wrong with this image of a cake? It's not a complete cake, right? Do you agree? Valentina, you might like this cake, but
right up my alley.
Exactly. But it's raw. It's not even baked, and the ingredients were whipped together very quickly. This cake lacks good follow-through. How would you like to be served this cake for dessert? And what's appealing about this image? Well, in contrast, it's a complete cake with all of the finishing touches. Not only does there appear to be substance within the cake, there's also icing on the cake. You can almost taste its goodness. And so good grant writing is a lot like making a good cake. You just have to be complete and know how to make those finishing touches. We'll talk about them. And just like you might love to eat that cake, I'd like to tell you why you should love to write grants. Well, grants allow you to carry out meaningful work. It helps you build what I like to call your empire of intellect. And when I think about the empire of intellect, I think about Thomas Cole's painting about the peak of the ancient Roman Empire, shown on the right. When my teenage son thinks about empires, he thinks about Star Wars. However you think about it, it still helps you build that empire. It's necessary for promotions. And your chair expects you to get grants because NIH grants help provide an important indirect cost. It helps organize your thoughts and plans, and it helps foster collaborations and sharing. So is grant writing easy? I'd like to submit that it is, because it's simply a standardized communication piece. And with a small group, such as fellows, I would ask each of them to take out a piece of paper and a pen and tell about how they would write about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they'd have 5 minutes, and they'd tell about what components are required, where you get those components, about the bread that's required, about the process of spreading that jelly and peanut butter ever so elegantly, and then putting the two pieces together, serving it properly. There might be mistakes along the way that could be anticipated, and how they would control for them. Well, and the learning points from this exercise are that just by talking about this, writing is simply a transcribed conversation. All you have to do is start by describing to someone or yourself the idea in mind. It helps break writer's block. And it's important to end the write-up by answering why the world is better off with you being given the chance to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Write what you mean. Be simple and straightforward. It's not about writing fancy words. It's about fancy ideas. It's like good music, which transcends, simple yet elegant. And you need to practice and edit. So let's edit what I call the Slithery Statement. There is a large body of experimental evidence that clearly shows that members of the genus Crotalus congregate simultaneously in cases of prolonged decreased temperature conditions in the latter part of the year. This was likely written by a first-year fellow. Does anyone understand this? Let's edit it. It turns out that it really means to say that rattlesnakes come together when it gets cold in the fall. See the benefits of editing. Editing also involves trimming the fat. Instead of saying period of time, can we just say time? Instead of final outcome, just outcome at the present time, just at present. Already existing. It is well known that there are 3 subtypes. How about just that there are 3 subtypes? Does anyone know who this is? And some of you have heard this talk before. Oh, those who haven't heard the talk before. Mark Twain, excellent. And he wrote, "Writing is easy. All you have to do is cross out the wrong words." So here's some more general writing tips. Use the active voice rather than the passive. Write short sentences. Use strong verbs. Avoid redundancies, but do remind the reader about key points. Provide a logical progression. It should be like telling a good story in which the words conjure up images and piece together scenes. Teach them something. Make their reading enjoyable, because these reviewers are doing it primarily on a voluntary basis. Develop a personal style that conforms, of course, to the requirements and reviewer expectations. The benefit of having a personal style is that it makes it easier to write grants frequently. I personally prefer to enumerate, provide bullet summaries, and make diagrams and tables. Developing a personal style of this type that I mentioned makes it easier for reviewers to copy and paste their write-ups into their written critiques. And I prefer to outline, because it's like the good novelist. You know how the write-up will end as it starts. Some more major tips for success. Identify good mentors, people who will help you climb up to the top. Find a nurturing environment. And do ask an important research question, and keep reminding the reviewers why your question is really important. Write about what is being asked. Pay close attention, like this gentleman in the cartoon, to instructions, formats, page limits, because guess what? They keep changing. We have a new NIH format, which consists of a 1-page project summary or abstract, a 1-page specific aims, and I would highlight the point that the specific aims page is the most important part of the proposal. In fact, as a reviewer, I will often just rip that out or print it out and keep that as a map for the rest of the proposal. And I'll often write on that piece of paper and gather my critiques based on that. Then there's the research strategy, which is about 12 pages. It involves the significance, the innovation approach, and the approach has to be sound. K08s or K23s include what's called the candidate info that Judy had talked about. I'd like to also say that publications and preliminary data matter. Publications support grant applications, and it's like a positive spiral because once you get the grants, they help pay for you to be able to continue to publish. Ideally, generate preliminary data for each of the specific aims and remind the reviewers why that preliminary data supports your hypothesis and provides feasibility for the proposed work. And I will often say in grants or write that these data support the hypothesis that X, Y happen, and they provide feasibility for the proposed work on this. It's helpful to know the NIH enhanced review criteria. It starts off with an overall impact score, which is the score that ranks your grant among applications. And it goes from 1 to 9, 1 being the best, 9 being the worst. There is a subjective 5 review criteria, and it doesn't factor into the score mathematically. It's just used by the reviewers to generate the impact score. And it consists of significance, which I would highlight because at the NIH, they will encourage reviewers to provide priority based on significance. The investigator, innovation, again, the approach, and environment. And as Judy mentioned, the 5 review criteria for KO8s and KO3s are slightly different and include more about the candidate, the mentors, the institutional commitment. It's also helpful to know the peer review process. So there are centers, and one of those centers is the Center for Scientific Review. It's like the Jedi Knight Council. You know, they're above the rest. They conduct the peer review process. And this is how it works. So a bunch of people, usually about 15 to 25 or more, get together for a day or two. They sit around a table that looks a lot like the table in this cartoon, and 3 of them usually are asked to read your grant in depth beforehand and to provide a written critique. They're also asked to discuss the proposal in front of the rest of the members. Importantly, all of the members get to voice an opinion and provide an equal score towards the overall impact. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means that you should make your reviewers your advocates in the way you write. Take advantage of mock study sections or pre-submission reviews of your grant proposal. Recognize that only some reviewers are experts in your field, and so don't bog them down with heavy terminology that only a few might understand. Make a game plan, just like the soccer diagram of a game plan. Run with the great question. Have mentors lined up. Look out for grant opportunities. And Judy mentioned the Friday NIH announcements. Talk to colleagues. Email or call a program officer. And, well, we have the benefit of having Judy in the room. So afterwards, I'm sure you might be able to talk with her. I often do an annual or semi-annual assessment of our grant portfolio as well as announcements and where we can move forward towards. Put together a realistic timeline. Remember those deadlines for cycles, and here's a case scenario for a KO8 or K23. You first obviously have to conceive of a hypothesis, an idea, do a literature review, generate some specific aims, then generate preliminary data and identify collaborators, in addition to your mentor, of course. Now, when you're ready to write, give yourself some time. 1 to 3 months to write that first draft, 1 to 2 months to edit the draft within your mini team, and then leave yourself some time, preferably 1 month, to edit subsequent drafts to a final level. And so it does take about 3 to 6 months to put together a really good grant. And I would emphasize that 1 month rule, which is have a polished first draft of at least the research plan 1 month before submission. So I'm going to tell you about my story about grant funding, and I do this with some trepidation because it's not about me. But I do recognize that there's a lot of gloom in the air about reduced research funding. And I'd like to say that if I can do it, then God willing, you can do it too. So I was a fellow at Yale for 3 years. Then for about 7 years, I was on faculty. About 3 years ago, I moved to the University of Pittsburgh. And what's shown at the bottom left is the flagship tower of Yale, which is Harkness Tower. And what's shown on the right is the University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning. So I was fortunate to receive a T32 NIH-funded institutional grant for fellows. When I finished my fellowship, I went through a couple of projects, and at the end, really had what I thought was a solid project. And so I applied for a KO8. I was able to receive that, but I quickly realized that I needed a little bit more funding to provide technical support. And so I applied to a whole bunch of foundations, and that was very rewarding. So I was able to receive an internal grant from an NIH-funded Child Health Research Center, an AGA grant, a NASPGHAN Foundation grant, and then a small NIH grant called an RO3. And then 2 years before the end of the K, I started sweating bullets because I realized that I needed to solidify the next steps. And so we got busy and really focused on one project, which was about calcium signals in pancreatitis and the role of the ryanodine receptor, which is a calcium channel. So I applied. I went through a couple of rounds, and I was able to obtain my first independent research grant. Well, just a couple of years after that, I really felt like there was another new project that we stumbled upon, which was about calcium targets. And so I said, let's see what happens. And I applied. And I was able to get funded for a project on a calcium target, calcineurin, in pancreatitis. So now I'm at the University of Pittsburgh, and I suddenly make friends with some pancreas development folks and learn about pancreatic regeneration. And I had this idea from a long time about the role of epigenetic factors, and we tested them. It was very interesting. The data were provocative, and so I just applied again. And fortunately, I was able to receive another independent grant on the role of HDACs in pancreatitis. But the story doesn't stop here. We're constantly planning about additional grants, related pursuits, about calcineurin targets, proof of concept for some of this work, program announcements on mechanisms of drug-induced pancreatitis. I'm privileged to be part of a pancreatitis consortium in children, and it would be really great if the university would allow it to have patents on some of this work. But here are some of the lessons that I learned along the way. It's that these initial funding mechanisms, the fellowship training grant, the foundation support, a K award, were crucial to jump-starting a research career. And the real truth about what looks like a nice portfolio is that more than half of my grants applications were actually not funded. But there is one certainty, that you will not get funded if you don't apply. So we're constantly strategizing about new grants and our next steps. And just to wind up, as far as next steps, I think we have to realize that both the NIH and industry spending are important to biomedical research and development. So the NIH provides about $30 billion towards allowing your project to really reach an important level, whether it's in basic research, translational research, or clinical research. But it's important to recognize that the pharmaceutical industry puts in as much or more spending to try to make that idea into a commercially viable product that can come back to the bedside. And I think both are important. So in summary, on getting NIH funding, grants are essential for building a research career or program, that empire of intellect. Grant writing can be helpful for organizing your ideas. It is learned and can be perfected over time. So spend that time. Give yourself time to edit your work and to show it to others. Understand the review process and put together a game plan. Write frequently. Sometimes grant writing or getting funded might feel like an uphill climb. What's shown is myself trying to climb one part of Camelback Mountain unsuccessfully. But it's great to reach the top. And what's shown on the right are a group of happy pediatric gastroenterologists at a third-year fellows conference on top of Camelback Mountain. And when I mean reaching the top, I don't think about gaining fame or fortune, but I think reaching the top really embodies the NIH mission, which is to improve health and save lives. And in ending, grant writing is like making a good cake. Carefully put all the right ingredients together, and it will taste good. Thank you.